So our speaker tonight is Sister Jeannine Gramick, who has cared for and campaigned for the LGBT plus community in the USA since 1971. I first heard about Sister Jeannine in 1999 when, together with her colleague Father Robert Nugent, she was ordered by the Vatican to cease this ministry to the LGBT community, which had by then developed into a social justice centre working for reconciliation called New Ways Ministry, which inspired the title of our event tonight. So while Father Nugent chose to comply with the order, Sister Jeannine did not. She rejected the request not to speak publicly about homosexuality or about the investigation into her work, stating publicly, "I choose not to collaborate in my own oppression." Hugely inspirational. So I'll let her tell her own story, but just how I came to be inspired and how we came to invite her is that Sister Jeannine was the subject of a documentary called In Good Conscience. Now, I first saw this in 2007 at a local meeting of Quest, which provides pastoral support for LGBT Catholics. And some friends and I used to run the local group. Now, the scene from this documentary which stayed with me most was when Sister Jeannine approached a conservative Catholic protester outside the Synod of US Catholic Bishops. She spoke with him and she prayed with him in a beautiful act of non-violent resistance. And together, she stood with him against the anti-Catholic and homophobic hatred and verbal violence of protesters from the Westboro Baptist Church. Her example of how to love and build bridges with those with whom we profoundly disagree is a lesson for us all, whatever our faith or background. So, when we heard that Sister Jeannine was speaking at the Quest National Conference this weekend, we had to go and hear her speak for ourselves. And then when another booking was cancelled, she had a gap in her programme which we were delighted to be asked to help fill. And so here she is, all the way from Washington, USA. Please welcome Sister Gramick.
Thank you very much. I am so delighted to be here with you. I realize this is an ecumenical group. We're not all Catholic as I am, but I must confess I am unabashedly Catholic. I've been Catholic really probably since I came out of my mother's womb. I grew up in a very, very Catholic city in Philadelphia, which was over 50% of the population is Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, went right from high school into the convent, went to Catholic college, went to Catholic graduate school at the University of Notre Dame. It was only when I went for my doctoral work at the University of Pennsylvania that I really ever met anyone who wasn't Catholic. So I think I might be a little tad provincial, but I may have grown out of that. But I'm very happy to be here to share, and I must confess that what I share with you comes from my Catholic heritage. But we can apply this across denominations. You know, the experience of LGBT people in the Catholic Church is replicated in other denominations. I also want to say, lest you feel a little uncomfortable because of the Vatican censure on me in 1999, it's a long time now, but I was assigned by my religious community to do this work. When I was at the University of Pennsylvania, I met a gay man, and through friendship with him, I had no idea what a homosexual person was. I really didn't. I was 29, and I didn't understand what that was all about. But through conversation with him, listening to him, being patient, hearing his story, to me that is the most powerful thing that can happen to us, to anyone, is for us to open ourselves to listen to someone's story. And ostensibly, we may say to ourselves, well, you know, I don't agree with what this person said, but, you know, quiet, you know, keep my mouth quiet and just listen. So listening to this young man at the university tell me that he had been raised, as I was, a Roman Catholic, but left the Catholic Church because priests told him he was going to hell. And he was finding consolation at the Episcopal Church on campus. He had many friends, who grew up also Roman Catholic, who said they would love to feel welcome in the Catholic Church. This was right after the Second Vatican Council. So how many here know what the Second Vatican Council was? Okay, for those who are not of my religious tradition, from 1962 to 65, Pope John the 23rd had called this council, which hadn't been done since the end of the 19th century, to update or modernize the Catholic Church. And it really was a revolutionary council. At any rate, so in those days following the Second Vatican Council, this was 1971 now when I met this young man, so it was right after the council, we were having Eucharist services in the home. So I said, well, let's have a Mass at your home, in your apartment, for your gay friends. I can't tell you how important that was for those people who cried because there was a priest who welcomed them and a sister who welcomed them, who didn't despise them because they were gay. It had a powerful effect. So I came back from the university on vacation time and spoke with my religious superiors, women superiors, and I don't like that word superiors. We call them women, our women leaders. And they were really women of vision, and they knew much more about this than I did, But they said, do what you can. The church has neglected this group of people, and we need to reach out to them. So I did finish my doctoral work, came back to Baltimore where the community had a college, taught in the math department, and when the community had another sister trained that had her PhD who could take my place in the math department, I was assigned by the community to full-time gay ministry and did that for decades. But not everyone in my church felt or was, I think, as enlightened as my religious superiors. So there were complaints lodged. And I won't go into all the complaints, but the sum and substance of the complaints was that the Vatican launched an investigation. And I'll just give you one example of how the investigation, I and Father Nugent, he was also working with me, how we thought it wasn't quite fair because at this one hearing we had with the Vatican Commission, we had a canon lawyer with us. We had a canon lawyer, a bishop, and our provincial leaders. That was our team. Our canon lawyer pulled out a paper, a letter, and asked the head of this Vatican Commission to explain this, because this letter said, it was written by a bishop, the main bishop who complained, to the Vatican, and the letter said, "At the risk of trying your patience, I write to you once again and ask you to bring pressure on Sister Jeannine's superiors to remove her from this ministry." So, it was like, let's put the pressure on. Well, I won't go into more. I've said more than I intended to. My first thought was I need a little apologetic to say to you that this ministry really is a work of the church. And as you know, there are forces in the church. There's politics in any church, in any organization. There's politics. So, but the women who assigned me to this ministry saw it definitely as a work of the gospel. And we have, I'm glad I met some of you ahead of time. We have many of you doing the work of the gospel in other Christian denominations. And we need a lot of ministers of the gospel reaching out to LGBT people. And so in 99, just to finish this little story, when the Vatican said that Father Nugent and I should no longer be in this ministry, I had a lot of discernment to do. I had a lot to pray about this a long time. And the result of my prayer really was that I felt still a twin calling. I felt called to religious life since the age of 7. I felt called to religious life. And I also felt called to help this group of people that was really despised, is not too strong a word, in my church. So I felt there was a need for a public advocacy for lesbian and gay Catholics. So my work has been mainly in the Catholic community. So I apologize to those here who are not from the Catholic community, but that's who I am. And I want this time with you mostly to be a conversation, because I don't want to stand up here and talk and have you nod off. I want us to engage in conversation. So I told you a little bit about my story, and I'd like also to hear your story. I'm going to tell you a little bit more, though, about my story, because on your seat when you came in, you probably saw this newsletter. And of course, I have to do an advertisement. This newsletter is from the organization that Father Nugent and I began. And it is, well, a newsletter really that's only published seasonally. And what it contains would be articles or news, it's a newsletter, news about what is happening about LGBT issues in the Roman Catholic community. So it won't give you any news of what's happening in the Episcopal Church or the Methodist Church or so on. But it's the Roman Catholic community. It comes out seasonally, but if you really want to know more news, we have a blog that is a daily blog for the last 4 years. We have information about things that are happening all over the world, not just the US where we're based, but all over the world. What's happening on LGBT issues that pertain to the Catholic community. And when the blog first started, Frank, who is the editor, I said, Frank, I think that's a great idea, but every day, I said, there's not going to be enough to write on. And sometimes he has to have 2 stories a day because of what's happening. So I was going to go through this and point out some things, but maybe I'll hold that off and point out as needed, because I'd rather, as I said, I'd rather have a conversation with you. And most likely what will happen is, what I find is, everything I wanted to say as as an input in the beginning, I wind up saying with you through questions, because you're probably thinking or wondering or want to share with me something that I would like to talk about too. So, tell me, why did you come here? Karen told you why I'm here, but why are you here? Well, you don't have to answer that question. You can make up one of your own. Okay, come on, your turn.
Yeah, I'm part of the shared ministry team with at St Michael with St Thomas in Widnes, and we're looking at what we can do to be more inclusive. Okay, good. What can we do to be more inclusive? Again, most of my experience is not just with the Catholic community, but in the Catholic community in the U.S. And what we have found in the last 20 years, actually, we have a lot of LGBT-friendly parishes. If you look in that newsletter that I gave you, the next to the last page has a whole list of parishes. Now, they're U.S., so if you go to the U.S., you'll know where to go. But these parishes
some of them are started as a result of a diocesan ministry, and some of them just grew up because they're located in an area of the city where there's where many LGBT people live. Or some of them just started because a parent came to the pastor and said, "My son is gay, and what do I do? And I need somebody to talk with." And so these parishes, what we encourage parishes to do is to have a support group for not only LGBT people, but their families and friends. So one thing we can do in a parish, go to your parish council, go to your pastor, go to the social justice committee, and start talking about this issue. It always helps if there's a parishioner who wants to talk about that issue. So anybody here in a parish that has outreach? Well, this is a parish with outreach. So, yeah. Okay, good, thank you.
The Catholic Westminster LGBT Catholic network down in London, and as you got Ruby from the Quest.
The Quest.
So twice a month they have a Catholic Mass on the Sunday evening at the Jesuit Church at
Farm Street. Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually signed up there as well when I'm down in London for my studies,
yes.
as well as signed up here
Yes.
at the open table. So that's an example where the Jesuits have taken on, as you know, the Archbishop's request that a particular parish embrace the LGBT Catholics.
Yes. I'll point out that on page 11, where you, not 11, whatever the next to the last page is, where there is a list. I think we do have Farm Street listed, but we can only list parishes that we know about. So you tell us, and we'll list your parish. But so for anybody here in London, we invite you to go to the Farm Street Church. Okay, good. Yeah, go ahead.
In addition, one of my priest friends that I stay with is Father Vincent Flynn, and he's at St Wilfrid's in Kennington, which is near Elephant and Castle, so he's given me great hospitality. But it was a parish due for closure, really, but he was sent there
to revive it.
So on his parish website he's constructed, it's an overt welcome to everyone.
That's great.
Yeah, absolutely everyone.
That's great.
Including people coming out of prison, as well as the LGBT and people in crisis and all that.
Yes.
So what's gradually happened is that because people feel welcome, the buzz is growing.
That's right.
Yeah, it's
and
amazing. What inclusion.
And isn't that what the gospel is about?
Yeah, absolutely gospel.
Everyone is welcome. Come to the table.
Come to the
table.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yes.
Just a bit of background. I'm also Catholic and also openly gay, but and I was also brought up Catholic as well. And it was only really in sort of the last 6 or 7 months that I felt that I would be able to link the two things together. And actually, I wanted to come and say thank you, because it's people like you, reading Father James Martin's book as well, which have really opened my eyes to how it is possible to be both LGBTQIA and Catholic, or any sort of Christian. The question I had, actually it links to the book that Father James Martin has just released, where he talks about building the bridge between the LGBT community and the Catholic Church. And he talks about how there should be mutual respect, compassion and sensitivity between the two groups.
Right.
Which, I mean, we can all agree, is universally the Catholic Church isn't doing that. But I suppose I was wondering in two questions. Firstly, do you think that's enough to ask from the Catholic Church to just have respect, compassion and sensitivity, or should we be asking for more?
I think that's where we start.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we see what develops.
Okay.
We do not make demands, and we should always have respect and sensitivity and compassion. And we don't know it. God is filled with surprises. We don't know what's going to happen. I would love to see much more than that, but that's where we start. Yeah, okay.
As a Catholic who's been both battered and nurtured by the church, in the sense that, the archdiocese here treated me abysmally, really did. Basically was equating my sexuality with paedophilia and things like that, without any justification. But then through the likes of Loyola Hall and my own spiritual director, I found a more compassionate face of Christ and an understanding that ultimately all that matters is my relationship with God. And let's face it, the one thing the church doesn't shout about is its ultimate teaching is to your own conscience be true. So if we in this room can say our love is sincere and is deep down, then God blesses it, and in some respects we are what it pleased God to make us. So I think that the church needs to be honest with itself and say its own teaching says if you sincerely believe that this is the way God has created you and whatever else, then it should be honest enough to say we accept that and we'll fall into the will that is God's will for you personally.
And that's what Pope Francis is telling us in his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia. I forget the paragraph, and somewhere in chapter 8, talking about conscience. And he does say, the church, we have, and by the way, I'm going to talk about church too, because we are all the church, but we have a responsibility all of us have a responsibility to help each other, form our conscience. When I was going through the discernment about what should I do, that was a decision of conscience. And I had the help of the church. I had sisters, mainly, who I could speak with. But at any rate, let me leave that church to another discussion. But in terms of conscience, Pope Francis has said that we have the church, meaning all of us, have a responsibility to help us form our conscience, not to replace our conscience, not to dictate to our conscience. He actually says in that document that the people of God are sufficiently mature that they can make their own decisions of conscience. We don't force people into saying, well, this is what your conscience has to say. All right? But I want to talk more then about church, because so often we think, and when we say church, we are thinking of, you said, the bishop here. This is how the bishop, thinks of me. But you said you have found consolation or help in other areas from other Catholics. They are church. They are church. So we have to get in our bones this idea that we are the church. And that's what Pope Francis, again, is trying to help us to understand. The church is the people of God. That's what the Second Vatican Council told us. But we have to believe it. I don't think we believe it. I think we say it, but I don't think it's inside of us in our bones. So when a representative of the church says something that is harsh and may not resonate with who you are, you think, well, are there other people in the church who do resonate with who you are? Well, they are church. All right?
My name is Richard. I'm a priest of this diocese, Catholic priest. Did you say our Archbishop was appalling you with...
No, I said the Archdiocese.
This
that treated
Archdiocese.
me appallingly. Well, it was not under the present Archbishop, it was the previous Archbishop. And it wasn't the Archbishop himself. Like typical bishops, he was very quick to distance himself, and it's somebody else's decision. I'm merely, whatever. Basically what happened was I used to be involved in serving at the cathedral, and I ruffled a few feathers. Nothing to do with my sexuality, just people, didn't like my face. And at that time, they were bringing out the child protection stuff. So this person brought, a couple of people whispered in the administrator's ear about, well, is it good to have a gay man, with all these choir boys and all the rest of it. And basically, I was told my face didn't fit. The decision imputes no guilt, but they'd rather I wasn't there. And basically, I on the day I was due to go and see the administrator, was this Friday morning, and on that Friday morning, where I used to work, there was a church that used to be open quite early in the morning. And I remember going in there, kneeling before the tabernacle and breaking down and crying. And all I could possibly say was, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner, and give me the grace to get through my working day so I could don't go to this appointment. And the Lord's inspiration came, because I thought, who else was walking up a hill? Because as you know, the cathedral is up Mount Pleasant. I thought, who else has been walking up a hill at 3 o'clock to meet his destiny? So I could link my own sufferings with that of Christ. And I've said many times publicly, through all of that and the places I've been, which I would not wish on anybody, the only person who has been there truly side to side with me is Christ. So at this point, I'm still a very devout Catholic, fervently would fight to my last breath for the dignity of the Church. But ultimately, it's about me and Christ. It's my personal relationship. And to me, it's all about personal relationship. It doesn't matter what the Pope says, anybody else says. It's about ultimately my relationship with Christ and Christ's relationship with me. And I know, I don't care what anybody says, I know my God loves me. And it's,
Yes.
and I'm sorry to get...
No, that's...
So that's what I mean. And then when I appealed to the Archbishop, I wrote him a letter which I think was about a page, and he wrote back half a page. I wrote him another letter, he sent me back 6 lines, basically saying, okay, trust in the one that the Lord has appointed, and all the rest of us. I thought I better stop before we get down to one line, because literally, So then I spoke to him at the back of the cathedral one day, and I could tell from his eyes, he hadn't got a clue what I was talking to him about, but he was a typical politician, standing up for, well, this is what's been decided, and I'm sure it's all done rightly, because he hadn't got a clue. All he'd done is simply wrote curt letters back to me saying whatever else. And that was the Archbishop at the time's style.
Well, and that was the previous Archbishop.
Yeah, I'm sure. But as I say, then I got involved with Loyola and through meeting fellow Christians and seeing an order that's as powerful as the Jesuits, who were willing to put their head above the parapet and say, well, no, maybe the gospel doesn't exactly say that. It reinforced, my dignity as a Catholic and gave me the strength to some extent to remain within the church, because I knew that this was just the inadequacy of certain members of the church. But I will say, though, I think it is shameful, absolutely shameful, that those who are given pastoral care of us, i.e. the bishops, etc., have not got the courage to either properly explore the question, because the magisterium, the curia in Rome just simply won't entertain it. These wise cardinals won't look and say, well, let's have a proper conversation. Oh, no.
Well, that's our job, to invite them to have the proper conversation. So this happened many years ago, right? How many years ago would it have been?
Probably about 15, 20.
15 to 20 years. It's a new time.
Yes, I appreciate
Yes. So we're Christian, we have eternal hope. We're people of resurrection, right? Mm-hmm. So we begin again. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Sister Jeannine, can you just tell us a bit about how you managed to go through all that you've been through with the Vatican and being, refused the ministry? What was the experience like for you? And how supported did you feel yourself to be by the LGBTQIA community as you went through that process?
Yeah.
What did you learn in it?
Well, I was depressed for a long time. I felt very supported by the LGBT community, who were very much afraid for me, actually more afraid probably than I was. But I've had a lot of support. I mean, I say that my support really was from God, but God communicating that support to me through people. One sister in particular, that to me she's a saint, but she was my greatest support. And even like people in my own community, I was a school sister of Notre Dame. I've since transferred to another community, the Sisters of Loretto, but not the Lorettos you have here. These are Sisters of Loretto from the U.S. Even sisters in my own community who loved me and thought that what was happening was not right. And I said, well, say something. Oh, no, I can't say anything. We have been so conditioned to be silent. And silence can be a form of violence if we don't speak up when we should be speaking up. So I just say my support really was from God, mainly through people. There were times I felt like I could not, I felt like a desert, when it came to prayer, but I knew God was at my side. And it was only a long time later that I realized it was almost like a year that I was in a depression, but didn't see it. But I came through.
Many people must have asked you, why didn't you just leave the Catholic Church? Why didn't you become an Episcopalian?
Oh, I could never leave the Catholic Church. They'd have to throw me out. Well, I look upon the Catholic Church as my spiritual home. And I think each of us, probably in whatever tradition we are, we feel that's our spiritual home, our religious home. So in my family, in my biological family, I didn't always, I'm an only child, or I was an only child, now I'm an orphan, but my parents and I wouldn't always see eye to eye, but I would never, ever turn my back on my parents, and I know they wouldn't turn their back on me. I have to tell you this one story. I don't know if it's relevant, but I have to tell you. When I was at the university way back in 1971, and I met this gay man at the university, and he thought, he loved, yes, but he thought we instruct through the media. So he said, talk with this reporter. I said, oh, okay. So I talked with this, I was very naive, but I talked with this reporter, and here on Sunday comes this big spread in the feature section, nun meets with gays at convent, And I chose to go to the University of Pennsylvania because it was located in Philadelphia, where I grew up. My parents were there. I could see them occasionally. So they were coming to see me this very day that the newspaper article came out. And I hadn't told them that I had met any gay people at the university. So my dad says, "What's this? Why are you working with those people?" They were his words, "those people." And I said, well, Daddy, I said, these people have been alienated from the church, and somebody in the church needs to reach out to them. Well, let the other nuns do it, he said. And then he said, this is 1971. The Vietnam War is going on. Many of my sister friends I was against the war, but they were demonstrating against the war. And he said, "You're not going to burn any draft records, are you? Or pour blood on these draft records?" And I said, "No, I probably won't." I said, "But what if I did? What if I went and I burned these draft records? Because I'm against this war. It's an immoral, well, I think all war is immoral." And he thought, and he said, "Well, that's against our country. But if you did it, it would be all right, because you're my daughter." I love that. I meditate on that so much. My father and I were like this. But to me, that is a simile, or it's more than a simile. To me, it illustrates God's love. It's unconditional. My Father's love for me was unconditional. I could do things he would not understand, he would not agree with, but it was all right because I was his daughter. And that's how God looks upon each and every one of us. We could do things that are horrible. I mean, we could really commit murder. It's terrible. And God would not like that. But God still loves us because we are children of God. And nothing that we can do, even how horrible it may seem to us or others, would take away that love. So I love my Father and my Heavenly Father. Yes.
What was the inspiration for the name of your organisation, New Ways Ministry?
Oh, New Ways Ministry. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. And that wasn't a plant either. But many people say, call it New Wave, like we're something way out there, a new wave ministry. New Ways Ministry was taken from a pastoral letter written by a bishop in Brooklyn, New York, way back in 1977. In the end of 76, the Vatican had written a declaration on sexual ethics. And this was a follow-up that the Bishop of Brooklyn was commenting on the Vatican Declaration on Sexual Ethics. And he wrote a pastoral letter called Sexuality, God's Gift. Even the title is good, Sexuality, God's Gift. And in his pastoral letter, he said that the church needs to find new ways to bring the truth of Christ to lesbian and gay people. We have to find new ways to do that. This is a different age. We're not in the 13th century anymore. We have to find new ways to bring the message of the gospel to those who really want to hear the gospel. Yes.
You asked why we came.
Yes.
And I'm a religious too. I'm a Catholic nun. And I came because from the very early times when you were being criticised by the Vatican, I felt really inspired by you. And I've always felt that as religious we're privileged. First of all, because we have premises.
Because
we have premises, we have houses where things can happen that are maybe not what the church is approving of, but it's much more possible for us to host people.
Like you'd have a retreat centre or something, you mean?
Or just a house.
Or just a house, yeah.
Quest, for instance, began in our convent in London. And to me that, I too feel passionate about the church as being ourselves, but I do feel the religious have got a role that we are not picking up enough. And we're not quite the official church, and that gives us a freedom, I think, that I would like to see us developing more on behalf of the lesbian gay community. And the other thing that struck me was we talk about bringing the gospel there, but actually the gospel is there in these people, in all of us.
Yeah.
And we need the love that they have experienced and expressed with one another. We need that in the church.
Yes. Talk about building bridges. We go and we give and we receive. It's two-way. I don't know if people here heard, but Sister is a woman religious, and I want to commend the women religious in the United States because most of the initial support that we got for this young ministry, New Ways Ministry as an organization, started in 1977, and it has survived, at least financially and morally speaking, because of support from women religious. In the States, in the United States, many congregations of women religious have set aside a certain percentage of their budget or their income for social justice causes. And we receive lots of donations from women religious, and that's a big source of our financial support and moral support. So that in 1999, when this came to a big head, you know, a crescendo with the Vatican, we had numbers of, I have a suitcase full of letters from congregations of women religious, from the heads, from the presidents of the congregations of women religious who wrote to the Vatican on our behalf. So, and I have been also mostly in London. I forget the congregations of women religious, but have been at some of the retreat houses. So I know that, and I used to say, I don't say it anymore because we're disappearing, but I used to tell LGBT people, if you want to start a ministry, get a nun to help you. Get a nun to help you.
Well, my story is quite extensive. I first I was a consecrated virgin first, okay, in Franciscan vows, which I took. Now for all who are here, I'm an intersex woman.
Okay.
Okay. Under the trans spectrum. Okay. And of course, some delightful person, when I've made my consecration, decided to inform the powers that be of what I was. And that didn't go down well. So,
this diocese?
This diocese, yes. Indeed.
Probably this bishop, that bishop?
No. Previous.
Oh, previous.
Archbishop Warlock, under him, yes.
Oh, Warlock.
So it was a difficult time, and but in that time I'd also started work with AIDS and HIV in this part of the world, and which led me to working with LGBT as well. And I moved forward in that particular ministry to the point where we set up a community called Bethlehem. And we gathered for prayer and so forth, but there was always that feeling that there was no sacraments, okay? There was no mass and so forth. So I took the unilateral decision to become a priest, and I did. And I was ordained in 2009, which automatically excommunicated me, obviously. So that was okay. That was fine. But I could continue in my work with LGBT, and I could offer the Mass. I could offer the sacraments, which was very important to me. I met with a couple of other sisters and thought about coming back to the Roman Catholic Church, because of course I took my my priesthood was with the Ecumenical Catholic Church.
I know them from the States.
Oh, thank you. So I was with them, and I thought, well, coming back, I could see the Vicar for Religious and speak with him, and he said to me, well, your priesthood is valid but illicit, because I'm a woman. Nice to be accepted as a woman, that was fine. And so he said, if you're prepared to write to Rome and express your sorrow for seeking ordination, and a penance would be given from the Holy Office and so forth, and things will be well, and you can continue your religious life within the Roman Catholic Church. So I thought long and hard, and I thought, no, that wouldn't be right. So I didn't. I remained a priest, and I formed another community with another group of sisters and so forth, and they were Roman Catholic, but they came to the Ecumenical Catholic Church instead. So that was great, and I was able to continue my work with in the LGBT community.
Blessings. Thank you.
And I don't think I've ever wanted to be anywhere else.
Yeah.
Sadly, I decided, because I wasn't I left that community, I wasn't part of anything, and I approached the Bishop of Liverpool, the Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, Bishop Paul, and I spent 2 years discerning what I was going to do and so forth. And I said I'd like to renew my vows within the Anglican community. And he said, I'd be delighted.
Oh.
And he said, if you're happy to lay your priesthood aside,
Oh.
I thought, well, that's okay, because I can work now equally as a religious. And so I did. And I made my consecration in April.
Oh,
Bishop Paul,
well, congratulations.
as a Franciscan sister with a Capuchin rule. So that was my story.
Well, thank you. What a beautiful story. Thank you very much. A story of following where God is leading you. And all of our paths are different. All of our paths are different. And for some of us who may be uneasy with the priesthood, a woman priesthood, in the early church, remember how in the early church there were no ordained priests. They gathered in house churches, and the person who was the leader in that house presided at the table. And we know some of those houses were houses of women. There's, what is it, the Catacomb of Priscilla in Rome that has that wonderful fresco of the women at the table. Oh, yeah. So, and I myself worship on Wednesday evenings with a group, men and women, and we have Eucharist together, as the early church did, you know. So there are many ways to pray to God, and there are many ways to minister to God's people. And we just need to open our little minds and not be stuck in one way of doing things. So thank you for sharing that story. It's beautiful. Okay.
I know you have lots more stories, so I could suggest. So the organisation in Rome that was issuing these letters was the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith. And for those that don't know, for a time that was headed by Cardinal Ratzinger, who then became Benedict. You have a beautiful story of bridge building with Cardinal Ratzinger.
Oh, that story. Okay. Well, my provincial superior in Baltimore was very worried about me. And she thought that I might be excommunicated because around that time there was a theologian from Sri Lanka, Tisa Balasuriya was his name, and the Vatican excommunicated him for some of his writings. And so she thought, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to get excommunicated. So she said, we need a miracle to save you. We need a miracle. So let's go to Munich, where the tomb of our foundress is, and pray at her tomb and ask for this miracle that you won't get excommunicated. So we were in Rome to board the plane to go to Munich, and we're on the plane, and sitting next to the window is somebody that she says is Cardinal Ratzinger. And I said, oh, no, it's a look-alike. Because this person didn't have on a Roman collar, it looked very haggard, and I said, it's somebody who just works as a clerk in one of the congregations. But there was nobody sitting next to him. He was by the window and there were 2 empty seats, so I just sat down next to him and I started to talk. I said, are you a priest? Because he did not have a Roman collar on. And he said, yes, he was a priest. And I said, well, I'm a sister and I'm going to Munich. I'm a school sister of Notre Dame. Do you know the school sisters? And he said, yes, he knew the school sisters of Notre Dame. He said, my aunt was a school sister of Notre Dame. So I knew immediately, because I knew Cardinal Ratzinger had an aunt in the community who had died, before I entered the community. But at any rate, Then I had to go back to my seat and buckle up because the plane was leaving. But I went back and I said to my provincial, "That's Cardinal Ratzinger." And she says, "I want to talk with him." I said, "No, I want to talk with him." So after they served us lunch, she said she was going to go back, and I said, "No, I'm going back," but I let her go back first. So she went back and said, "You know, the sister that you were speaking with was Sister Jeannine Gramick." And he said, "Oh," he said, "I have known her for 20 years," because they had had a file on me for 20 years. So she told him that she was very worried that I was going to get excommunicated. And he said, "Oh, no. He said, "It is not that level of doctrine." So I like to tell the story to LGBT Catholics because I said, if you're worried about excommunication, forget it. Because it's not going to happen, because it's not that level of, it's not important enough to get excommunicated for. So he said to her, "Would she speak with me?" And she said, "Oh, I'm sure she would." So she came back to the seat and she said, "He would like to see you." I said, "Great, I want to see him." So I sat down again and we started to chat, and he, you know, how did I get into the ministry? And I told him the story about meeting Dominic at the university, and that we had these home masses for Dominic and his friends, and he thought that was wonderful. Wonderful. Ministering spiritually. His concern was, he said, "But you give conferences, like you speak publicly. It's the public versus the private. You know, it's almost like you can do anything in private. But once it becomes public, you know, then there's another issue. And we have to tackle that problem, really, you know, this public-private split. But at any rate, but you give, you know, public talks, yes. Do the bishops invite you? He asked. And I said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Some of them do," which was true, and some of them don't. But we go anyway. And then he said, "And you used to teach mathematics?" I said, "Yes." And he was trying to say, "Oh, don't you want to teach mathematics again?" You know? So we had about a 20-minute conversation, and I asked him, had he ever met any gay people? And he said, yes, when Pope John Paul II and I were in Berlin, there was a demonstration of homosexuals. That was his idea of meeting gay people in a confrontational situation. So if I had had my wits about me, which I don't always have with me, but there's a woman I know in Washington, D.C., a lesbian woman, whose uncle is a very good friend of Cardinal Ratzinger's, and she, on occasion, would visit her uncle and have dinner with Cardinal Ratzinger and her uncle. However, it may not have made a difference because she didn't come out. She's not out to her uncle, and therefore wouldn't have been out to Cardinal Ratzinger. And again, I tell that story because it's so important to come out, to tell our stories. I know you were shaking your head, you all agree. I mean, how do we change our feelings, our attitudes? By listening to people's stories. We have to tell our stories. So he hadn't heard any stories, really, from lesbian or gay people. Oh, this funny little story. He said, well, you know, your bishops, the U.S. bishops, were writing a document at the time, which I will proudly say was at the nudging of New Ways Ministry. The U.S. bishops wrote a document called Always Our Children. I don't know if any of you heard of it?
Yeah.
You heard of it? Good. And it's addressed to parents. And we at New Ways Ministry had written to the Bishops' Conference asking that they have a pastoral document about and for LGBT people. and got a very polite letter back saying, well, you can't put things on our agenda. But we went to some bishops that we know, and Bishop Gumbleton kind of rounded up around 12 bishops, his friends, and they wrote a letter. Well, we wrote the letter, they sent it. They signed it and sent it to the bishops' conference and asked for that the bishops, the U.S. bishops, draft a pastoral document on LGBT people, which they did. It took many years, really, to get through. And if you know how the church works, any church, it takes a long time to get something done, right? So, and each draft was worse than the first, but I mean, in the first draft they talked about conscience. By the time they were finished with the document, there was no talk about conscience. But at any rate, so Cardinal Ratzinger said, that your bishops are writing this document. I said, yes, and they have your suggestions. And they took your suggestion. There's now another edition, and it was given out in Pittsburgh at the bishops' conference just last month. And I have a copy. Oh, you have a copy, he says. I do not yet have a copy. And I said, well, if I just had known we were going to meet, I would have brought you a copy. So I say that because it was delightful exchange. You know, he was very, very delightful. And I also feel that he was a very spiritual man, because several times in the course of the conversation, he said the word providence, kind of under his breath, but I heard it. Providence, he would say, providence. Like this was a providential meeting. My superior general had asked him if he would meet with me in the course of all of these deliberations and meetings with the Vatican Commission. She said, would you meet with Sister? No, because it wasn't anything against me. It's not the way they operate. It's not in their process. So they need to be liberated. I mean, they're constrained by the rules that exist. Thank God Pope Francis is trying to change those rules. But I say that because I think he's a holy man. He was saying his breviary when I interrupted him. He recognizes the hand of providence, and he has very beautiful blue eyes. So anyway, yeah.
In theory, I believe the Catholic Church had an idea that speaking ex cathedra as a pope is supposed to come from the bottom of the church and gradually worked itself up.
Yes.
To be expressed by the pope. There must be many clergies who actually do listen to stories like you do and listen to people. Do you see that there's a moving from the bottom of parish churches,
yes,
moving up that, and it may change St. Peter's chair?
Oh, I definitely see a great movement. As I said, in 1971, when I was at the university, things were tight. You never said the word gay didn't exist. Well, it did. There was the Gay Liberation Front, but in the Catholic community it was homosexual, and you never heard that word. But no Catholic paper would have anything. Now you pick up a Catholic paper, there's a retreat for gay Catholics in, Toledo, Ohio, or we read about it, and the fact that I went through all of this trouble really is a blessing in disguise, because it raised the issue. It got people talking on the international level, not just in the U.S. This ban appeared in L'Osservatore Romano. Of course, everybody picks up, L'Osservatore Romano, the Vatican newspaper. So, all of the things that we think are pain and suffering leads to something good. The foundress of my first community, the School Sisters of Notre Dame, she wrote many letters, and one saying of hers, I have it above my desk, and I meditate on it a lot. And she wrote to the sisters and said, all of the works of God proceed slowly and in pain, but their roots are the sturdier, and their flowering is the lovelier. The pain that we go through, but it makes us stronger and more beautiful. Flowers are more beautiful. And I think of that, that is certainly true in my life. So, yeah, so that's my little Ratzinger story.
Susan, can I ask you?
Yeah.
Do you think the trans community are sort of the poor relations when it comes to campaigning and so forth?
Do I think the trans community are poor relations? Yes, I do, but that's understandable. I mean, I know in the U.S., the trans, we say LGBT, but it was, you know, mostly G, and then a little bit of L, but... But I'll tell you, and it's cultural. I was in El Salvador. I've been there several times, number of times, but maybe 3 years ago, El Salvador had its first conference on human rights for LGBT people. And that was probably about 3 years ago. And what struck me was that the leaders were mostly trans women. And I asked about this, and they said, well, you know, trans women, at least in El Salvador, are apparent visibly. I mean, and lesbian gay people can hide their existence more. So lesbian gay people are afraid to come out because you can be killed in El Salvador for being lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender or intersex. A very good friend of mine is an intersex woman from El Salvador who has fled to the United States seeking asylum because of threats on her life. And her people that she had worked with in the movement, her best friend was killed. So to answer your question, yes, I do think trans people in the United States, that's you know, a secondary issue, but it's becoming more prominent. Now we have the bathroom issue, so I mean that's good, you know. It's good because it's raising the issue. You know, all of this is good. And we have to have the public discussion before people's minds, you know, get changed.
For a number of years, I lived on the Wirral, and about a year before I left, a new bishop arrived, rather like a new pharaoh, who did not know Moses. And the Catholic bishop in Shrewsbury has become known for being openly homophobic and certainly anti-trans and anti-gender. Recently had various talks by Gabrielle Kubi, who is against, on her book, The Sexual Revolution. So therefore, a Quaker chaplain in the Midlands, Joan, involved in the prison service, I'd never heard it before, described turning the other cheek, right, as not wanting to be impolite, but the phrase Joan used was a facial mooning.
A facial?
Mooning.
Oh.
A mooning. Which basically is a strength of, you know, well, you want to hit this side, well, you can hit the other. It's actually a strong, in being non-violently resistant, it's actually a strong statement.
It's the strong statement.
And a strong movement against the homophobic voice.
Yeah.
So when you were speaking of, you know, God's beauty and God's divine love, and Cardinal Ratzinger's deep faith in providence, you know, my own thoughts in relation to the current Bishop of Shrewsbury is that turning the other cheek, that anger doesn't help.
No.
And even when there is such a strong voice, and he is promoting the anti-LGBT agenda as we speak, and has been doing so for a number of years.
Yeah. It's normal to feel angry. It's okay to feel angry, but what do we do with that anger? And as you said, if we vent, get it out, and then think about it, and don't vent it to the person who's making you angry. That's not going to help the situation. But yes, turning the other cheek. Being kind. Go back to what we had said earlier, compassion, respect, right? That's how the bridge is going to be built. Those bridges get built with respect for the other person. Even though we might feel really, really angry at them, we still have to have the respect. Yes?
I just got to quote a friend of mine who, many years ago, when given a sermon, said, Jesus asks that we treat the undeserving with unmerited generosity. It is the only way that we and they and the wound that separates us will be healed.
Yes, yes. Can you say that again into the microphone for us all to hear clearly? It's beautiful. Yeah.
Jesus asks that we treat the undeserving with unmerited generosity. It is the only way that we and they and the wound that separates us will be healed. I love those words. I find it very hard to carry them out.
Yes, yes, yeah. But we need to try. Yes, yes, yes.
I was in Ireland when the referendum was on.
Okay.
I was there. I'm a religious sister. And this gentleman back here was asking if anything was changing. Well, I knew before I came back that it was going to be passed, because the younger people don't really see a big problem,
No.
So, but I think the word marriage seems to be a barrier, because there are people who are quite happy to have contracts and, other words, but somehow marriage denotes there's kind of an irregularity there. Could you maybe expand a bit on that?
Sure, sure. This is where I think history, church history and history in general, help. We always need to know what precedes the current situation. Some people will say, oh, Jesus instituted the sacrament of marriage. No, Jesus didn't institute the sacrament of marriage. Jesus went to the wedding feast of Cana and celebrated. In the early centuries of the church, like the first, second, third, fourth centuries, leaders of the church wanted nothing to do with marriage. Marriage was a family situation. It was a celebration that families coordinated. And you celebrated, this family is joined with, it was really joining of families. And then gradually the state started to exercise some authority over marriages. And with good reason. I mean, to regulate, it was all economics, right? When the Roman Empire started to crumble with the invasion of, we say barbarians, but other peoples, the leaders of the church took on the role of Roman rulers, because the Roman Empire was just disintegrating. And so marriage gradually then came to be regulated by church officials. And at that time, some of the couples asked for a blessing. So the bride and the groom would come and stand outside the church. They didn't even go into the church. And they would get blessed. And then after a period of time, they would have a ceremony in the church. But it wasn't really, I think, in 9th, 10th, something in that area, where it became really regularized and under the control or authority of church leaders. and didn't become a sacrament really until, as we know it today, at least in the Catholic community. We say there are 7 sacraments, one of which is matrimony. This all came about with the Council of Trent, all right, to say that there are these 7 sacraments. So we have to realize there's been development, all right. Okay, so that's one piece, the historical piece. The church had a lot of control, church leaders, I should say, because we are the church. Church leaders had a lot of control over people's lives and acted as civil leaders in many respects. Okay, because we know in church history that the big controversy between the kings and the emperors, the Holy Roman emperors, and the bishops, and there was the civil authority and the church authority, and they were struggling who has the power, whose authority do we obey. But with the French Revolution, that was very significant. The French Revolution says, no, the church does not have control. And that French Revolution spilled over into other countries, all right? So the marriage then came under the aegis, under the control back under the control, I should say, of the state. So you speak about, how it is in Ireland, how it is in different countries, but the situation is in the United States. Let me speak about the U.S. because that's the situation in many countries. Marriage is regulated. There's a civil marriage and then there's a religious marriage. Religious marriage is regulated by the churches, not just the Catholic Church, any church, right? The civil marriage is under the control of the state. So when lesbian and gay people in the U.S. and elsewhere, in many of the countries are asking for marriage, they're asking for civil marriage. And I just recently read a good article by the priest who's in charge of, he does media in someplace in Asia. But at any rate, he's saying this is now a hot topic, in Asia, marriage. He said, but we have to remember marriage in Asia, in the countries he's talking about, Thailand and so on, is a function or under the control of the state. And he said, our Catholic bishops wouldn't think of trying to get the state to legislate about divorce and change the divorce laws. That's because we don't impose our beliefs on the whole community. So if we don't lobby to change divorce laws, we shouldn't lobby. Or let me put it this way. If we don't want to force the state to be in line with what we think about divorce, we wouldn't think of doing that. Well, why would we think of forcing the state to have our religious beliefs about marriage? Is that clear? Or okay. So we, you have to think: is this a religious issue or is this a civil issue? But then we can say, okay, it's a civil issue. So civil marriage, lesbian gay people can get civilly married. But then that doesn't leave us off the hook. Now, what about that further question? What about sacramental marriage? Do lesbian and gay people have a right to sacramental marriage? Do women have a right to the sacrament of the priesthood? Doesn't baptism give us the right to all the sacraments? Now, that's the question that needs to be answered. And theologians are directing answers to that.
Yeah, I'm just interested in, I see in your newsletter there, bondings. You're dealing with, I look forward to reading it, the latest document, or latest, end of 2016, wasn't it, on vocations.
Oh, for the priests, yeah.
So it's saying, in effect, we should be barred from ordination for being gay. A great document in many ways, but there's that one little line, and you say, well, my God, does this mean all these years of priesthood are invalid, that we've served those guys as a gay priest? or barring guys coming into the seminary now because of being gay.
Yeah.
There's a real problem there, and I don't know, on terms of all the area of protest, I'd almost love to see one Sunday in the year when every gay priest down tools, you know, and see where the church is. Because the sheer hypocrisy of it.
Yes, yes,
Sheer hypocrisy of it. And therefore the very notion of, you know, they reaching out to gay people, they issuing documents to gay people. It's so hypocritical because there's no they. We need to be starting to talk about we.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Again, there's you put your finger on it. That private, public. It's okay to be a gay priest as long as you don't make it known. As long as it's private. You know, just don't make it known, Father. It's okay. Just be discreet. You know. Yeah. Okay.
Isn't that something to do with? I mean, I'm a firm believer in they've got to be true to me. What you mentioned before about coming out, I don't think it is necessary for me to come out to everybody.
No.
Because, no. Let me finish.
Okay.
Because sometimes I'm putting a burden on somebody that is not theirs to carry. Because I can't, if I expect people to accept me and the way I've been formed to my own life experience, I can't turn around to somebody who is a product of 30 or 40 years ago and say, the way you were brought up with your culture, in your culture, and you know the homosexuality wasn't talked about, or you know you might have your two maiden aunts or you know two male friends, but you know we don't ask any questions. I can't condemn people for being comfortable with that, as long as they don't start using derogative language or being out and out prejudice towards me. In the same way as you know, sort of some of our younger people who have a more hedonistic view and are more open about that side of things, which just doesn't sit easy with me. I can't turn around and say, you're wrong because you're too liberal or else. So I think to some extent, you know, the church has a duty to not scandalise itself. Now, that's not to say it shouldn't speak out.
When you said the church, you mean all of us?
Yeah, all of us.
Okay.
Yeah, but all
just
of us.
Checking.
But the teaching authority of the church, to some extent, I mean, yes, a gay priest should feel comfortable to say this is me, but they shouldn't feel that necessary to be sort of walking onto the altar with a rainbow stole.
We shouldn't expect or force anyone to come out, whether they're a gay priest or not a priest. We don't force people, you know. So we have to respect.
To me, whether a man or a woman, sexuality is their private business.
Yes.
So if a man is a priest, celibacy is celibacy. So as long as he is living by the celibacy, whether he is attracted to men, women, both or whatever else, doesn't affect my respect for his ministry.
Right.
And I don't think, I mean, it's useful, of course it is, from a confessional point of view. I would find it a lot easier to talk with somebody I knew was a gay priest because they can understand my struggle, whatever else. But it's not necessary.
It's not necessary, but we need to respect gay priests, whether they are out or not out. Yeah. So that if a gay priest chooses and feels comfortable and feels called to come out, what's wrong with that? Okay. A final word. Okay.
One imagines, and I say one, I guess I'm talking about me, that religious communities actually would attract lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer. By its nature, because you're giving up family. And so the kind of people who are having children or whatever, that's not an issue anyway.
Yeah.
And one would also imagine you draw an unusual number of sensitive, caring, deeply reflective people. So have you developed literature within your own communities, religious communities, that address these issues for your own sake? Because historically, you get the idea, the way it was addressed by very strict rules of not touching anybody,
right.
all these extraordinary robes to prevent you being badly behaved sexually.
Yeah.
But I assume you've addressed this more positively. Is that true?
I can only speak of the U.S. experience. Oh, I can say a little bit about Poland. I was there and spoke with the head of the Women Religious Conference in Poland. But in the U.S., we have lesbian sisters as well as gay priests. And New Ways Ministry has had a support ministry for lesbian sisters since the early 90s, so that's almost 30 years. There's a newsletter for lesbian sisters. There's online, what do you call it, listserv. And about once a year, we have conferences for lesbian sisters, congregational leaders of those communities of women religious, and formation and vocation directors. And the purpose of these conferences is understanding that the lesbian sisters would understand that people in leadership, women religious, support them, and vice versa, that the leaders and the formation directors listen to the experience of lesbian sisters and support them. So these conferences have been extremely successful, and as I said, we've had them now, we had about, well, it doesn't matter how many, dozens. We recently started to have these conferences for priests, gay priests, and their congregational leaders, or if they're diocesan priests, diocesan personnel who are in charge of priest formation. And there's more hesitancy among the men. They've been successful retreats, but it's mostly it's the gay priests who come. The leaders, the formators, and the diocesan personnel are just a little nervous. Well, I shouldn't say nervous. I don't know why they're not coming, but we have the retreats for gay priests. So there is an attempt, at least, to try to understand and promote acceptance.
That's
Okay.
Wonderful message to end on. Thank you very much indeed. Let's show our appreciation for.
Thank you.